From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I speak to the administration of Chevron. Our democracy is at stake here. Our health is at stake here. Our planet is at stake here. You must adhere to the will of the people.
1 year ago today, a massive fire at a Chevron refinery in Richmond, California, sent 15,000 people to the hospital with respiratory problems. We'll speak with Richmond's mayor as Chevron agrees to pay $2 million. Then as President Obama travels to Phoenix to speak about housing recovery, we'll look at the devastating impact of the foreclosure crisis.
At this point, they're trying to evict me. The house was foreclosed on. They're trying to evict me, and I'm trying to keep my home. My thing is, you took my money all those years. Either work with me and let me keep my home, or give me my money back.
We'll look at how Richmond, California is planning to use eminent domain to help fight the foreclosure crisis. And we'll speak with Laura Gottesdiener, author of the new book, A Dream Foreclosed, Black America and the Fight for a Place to Call Home. But first, we look at the National Security Agency and the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. DEA agents are using intelligence gathered by the NSA to investigate Americans and then being ordered to cover it up. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Jeff Bezos is buying The Washington Post, one of the leading newspapers in the country. The Amazon.com founder and chief executive is one of the wealthiest people in the United States. He'll pay $250 million for the Post and a number of other publications, less than 1% of his wealth, which is estimated at more than $28 billion. Bezos is a friend of Donald Graham, chief executive of The Washington Post company, whose family has owned the newspaper for 8 decades. Over the past 6 years, the company's newspaper division has seen a 44% drop in operating revenue. In addition to the Washington Post, Bezos will get a number of other Post-owned businesses, including the Gazette newspapers, Greater Washington Publishing, and El Tiempo Latino. The deal does not include Slate.com or Foreign Policy magazine, which are owned by the Washington Post company, the parent company, which also owns the test prep company Kaplan and will change its name following the sale of the paper. Bezos said management of the Washington Post newspaper will remain the same, but it's unclear what changes might be coming. Last year, Bezos was quoted in an interview with a German newspaper saying, quote, "There is one thing I'm certain about. There won't be printed newspapers in 20 years, maybe as luxury items in some hotels that want to offer them as an extravagant service. Printed papers won't be normal in 20 years, he said. The announcement about Bezos' purchase came just days after Boston Red Sox owner and billionaire John Henry entered an agreement to buy the Boston Globe newspaper from the New York Times company for $70 million. The Obama administration's ordered all non-emergency personnel to leave Yemen and urged U.S. citizens currently living there to depart immediately. In a statement issued today, the State Department cited the continued potential for terrorist attacks. Meanwhile, a U.S. drone strike killed 4 people in Yemen today, marking the 4th such attack in less than 2 weeks. Yemeni tribal leaders said the dead were suspected members of al-Qaeda. One is believed to be a senior al-Qaeda member named Salah Jauti. The news follows revelations that electronic communications between al-Qaeda leaders were behind the shuttering of nearly 24 diplomatic posts over the weekend. In the intercepted messages, al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri reportedly ordered the leader of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the group's Yemeni affiliate, to carry out an attack as early as this past Sunday. The New York Times originally withheld the names of the leaders involved at the behest of U.S. intelligence officials, but revealed them after they were published by McClatchy newspapers. The U.S. is keeping 19 diplomatic outposts in the Middle East and Africa closed through the week due to the threats. The recent security fears have been used by some lawmakers to defend the National Security Agency's sweeping spy programs, which have come under fire after they were revealed by Edward Snowden. A reporter noted the timing of the threats during a briefing with the State Department spokesperson, Marie Harf.
Couldn't it be argued that suddenly we're hearing about this potential threat to U.S. interests and U.S. persons and property at a time when there's a lot of debate and a lot of criticism of this program, as well as other NSA types of surveillance.
I can assure you that that in no way at all, period, 100% affects how we evaluate threat information coming in, specifically in terms of this threat.
The court-martial for an Army major accused of killing 13 people during a rampage at Fort Hood, Texas, opens today at the same base where the attacks took place in 2009. Major Nidal Hassan has won the right to represent himself in court, meaning he'll likely question some of the same people he's accused of attacking. Judge Tara Osborne has already struck down Hassan's planned defense that the shootings were an attempt to protect Taliban leaders in Afghanistan from U.S. soldiers. Hassan is charged with 13 counts of murder and 32 counts of attempted murder. He could face the death penalty if convicted. The sentencing hearing for U.S. Army whistleblower Bradley Manning continued Monday with testimony from a top State Department official. Patrick Kennedy, Undersecretary of State for Management, claimed Manning's leak of diplomatic cables to WikiLeaks has had a chilling effect on U.S. diplomacy by making foreign officials less forthcoming in private talks. He said, quote, "It's impossible to know what someone is not sharing with you, and this is in itself, I believe, a risk to the national security," he said. But Kennedy acknowledged the State Department had never completed a damage assessment for the leaks. Clashes have erupted in Turkey after a court sentenced former military chief İlker Başbuğ to life in prison for trying to overthrow the government of the Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The court sentenced scores of other military officers, journalists and politicians, including 3 current members of parliament from the opposition Republican People's Party. Opposition lawmaker Akif Hamşetçebi condemned the court's decision.
This judiciary sentenced a military commander to life in prison. This is a threat to the Turkish military and is unacceptable. If you put a commander who was the head of the army on trial as a member of a terrorist organization, it means you are targeting the army of the Turkish Republic. People will not accept this.
The case has highlighted tensions between the Islamist-led government, Turkey's secular establishment, and the rising tide of protesters seeking alternatives. Following the verdicts, riot police fired tear gas and rubber bullets at some 10,000 protesters massed near the courthouse. Major League Baseball has suspended New York Yankees star Alex Rodriguez and a dozen other players as part of a massive doping scandal linked to an anti-aging clinic in Florida. Rodriguez was banned through the 2014 season, but immediately appealed, allowing him to play Monday night, while the other players received 50-game suspensions. The league says Rodriguez used performance-enhancing drugs and then interfered with the investigation into the now-defunct Miami clinic. Florida's executed a man diagnosed as schizophrenic after the Supreme Court denied a last-minute bid to stay his execution. Lawyers for John Ferguson say his death violated the Eighth Amendment, which requires a person to understand the reason for his execution and the impact of the death penalty will have. They said Ferguson believed he would rise again after his execution to fight alongside Jesus Christ and save the country from a communist plot. Ferguson was sentenced to death in 1978 for his role in 2 sets of killings. He died by lethal injection at 6 p.m. Eastern Time Monday. His final words were, "I just want everyone to know I am the Prince of God and I will rise again." Britain's Metropolitan Police have apologized to the family of a man killed by an officer during London's G20 protests in 2009. Ian Tomlinson was a newspaper seller who played no role in the protest. He was walking home with his hands in his pockets when a police constable struck him with a baton and shoved him to the ground from behind. A pathologist initially claimed Tomlinson died of a heart attack, but it was later found he died from internal bleeding. The officer, Simon Harwood, was acquitted of manslaughter last year, but later fired for gross misconduct. On Monday, police announced a settlement with Tomlinson's family and apologized unreservedly for Harwood's use of excessive and unlawful force. Tomlinson's widow, Julia, called the apology as close as we're going to get to justice. Rebel fighters in Syria have taken control of a key air base in the province of Aleppo, a significant gain that follows a series of recent losses to the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. The news comes as new reports find both sides are continuing to commit abuses. Human Rights Watch says the Syrian military is firing ballistic missiles into populated areas, killing civilians, while the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for an independent probe into claims rebels executed dozens of government soldiers in Aleppo. Navi Pillay called the alleged killings, quote, further evidence that flagrant violations of international humanitarian and human rights law committed by all parties have tragically become the norm in the Syrian conflict. Japan is marking the 68th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. warplane Enola Gay dropped a nuclear bomb on the city. An estimated 140,000 people died from the effects by the end of the year, although some estimates have put the toll much higher. 3 days later, the U.S. dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. The city observed a moment of silence at 8:15 local time, the moment the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima today. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe spoke later at a ceremony.
Japanese are history's sole victims of the nuclear attack, and we have the certain responsibility to bring about a world without nuclear weapons. And it is our duty to continue to remind the world of nuclear weapons in humanity.
The anniversary comes as Japan faces a nuclear crisis of a different kind at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant that was battered by an earthquake and tsunami in 2011. Groundwater contaminated with high levels of radiation has breached an underground barrier meant to contain it, fueling concerns it could reach the surface of the ground and accelerate the leaks. A nuclear watchdog official told Reuters, quote, "Right now, we have an emergency." Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal has declared a state of emergency after a train derailed and spilled hazardous materials in a community west of Baton Rouge. Roughly 100 homes remain evacuated following the derailment Sunday. Damaged cars have been leaking materials, including sodium hydroxide, which can be fatal if touched or inhaled. Critics of the Republican agenda in North Carolina are taking their struggle statewide with the launch of Mountain Moral Mondays. Nearly 1,000 people were arrested during 13 weeks of Moral Monday actions at the Capitol in Raleigh. On Monday, thousands gathered in downtown Asheville to continue protests against the rollback of voting rights, unemployment benefits, and abortion access. Reverend William Barber, head of the North Carolina NAACP, said the protests are coming to all 13 congressional districts. Police at the state capitol in Madison, Wisconsin, arrested a number of people Monday during the latest Solidarity Sing-Along, a peaceful singing protest against Republican Governor Scott Walker held each weekday in the Rotunda. The singing has been a fixture at the Capitol for more than 2 years, since the mass mobilization against Walker's anti-union policies. But protester Steve Burns says police have arrested well over 100 people in a crackdown that began late last month.
This is a culmination of a 2.5-year struggle for free speech. We've been in the struggle with the Walker administration that's attempted to put a capital access policy in place that restricts people's use of the People's House as a forum for free speech. And so this latest escalation includes arresting people and then citing us for a violation of the permit policy of the Walker administration. You see sing-alongs popping up in other places. We've heard there's a Michigan sing-along, there's a Texas sing-along. People need to reclaim their state capitals. There are states that have even more restrictive laws than we have, and it's time that the people take back their capitals as the people's house.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.